DBS, the largest bank in Southeast Asia, added hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue by implementing cutting-edge technology, including artificial intelligence. What can we learn from what they did so our businesses can benefit most from AI? This is the big question, especially as generative AI reshapes everything from customer interactions to internal processes. Unfortunately, there is no simple formula to answer this question. So I talked to Nimish Panchmatia, the Chief Data and Transformation Officer at DBS Bank, to learn more about how they succeeded in implementing technology and what we can learn from them, because this is what we do on the Asia Tech Podcast. Nimish has been a key player in DBS's transformation journey, spanning over a decade, from customer-centric innovation to embedding AI across the organization. And this is no easy task when DBS has 40,000 employees. We explored how DBS has embedded an experimentation mindset, how they navigate the evolution from traditional to generative AI, and foster innovation while ensuring customer and employee satisfaction. Let's welcome Nimish to the show now. Before we jump in, let's thank the sponsor of this episode, Dr. Tech. Dr. Tech can help you build your e-commerce store and start selling quickly online and on social media in just a few days. And Dr. Tech stores are gorgeous, modern, and responsive. They are fully customizable and simple to use. Dr. Tech stores have hundreds of included optimizations that will help you sell more online, and a support team that can answer all of your questions. With Dr. Tech, there are no hidden costs, no commissions on sales, no add-ons to buy. Everything is included in one simple subscription. So go to hellodr.tech/ATP to get a free trial and start building your store. You can find the link in the description below. Also, Dr. Tech is offering a special deal to the listeners of the Asia Tech Podcast. After your free trial, you can get your first full month for only $1. To get this deal, simply type ATP into the live chat and they will send you a special promo code. Thanks again to Dr. Tech for sponsoring, and now let's get back to the show. I feel like AI, we were talking about this a little bit before when we were offline. I think AI is beyond the hype phase right now. And I'm just curious about how we can talk about DBS in particular, but let's talk about the finance industry as a whole. How can the finance industry, you think, if you look at all the stuff you've been through, all the digital transformation and all the lines of business that you've looked at, how do you capture this value of AI and machine learning as you can go through this continual process of adding tech into all of the places where business operates?
So I think it needs to be looked at in two parts, right? And the first part is traditional AI, what we call traditional now, which was pretty cutting edge not so long ago before, generative AI turned up.
Yeah.
And so for the traditional AI, I think, a lot of organizations have made progress. I think we've made significant progress ourselves. This year, for example, 2024, we're going to attribute over $780 million in incremental economic value purely from AI. And this is, not, applied AI somewhere here or there. Actually, this is, on a test and control basis. So pretty strongly validated numbers. This is doubled from last year, and it's doubled from the year before. So we're quite ambitious. We've invested quite a lot. We started on this journey a long time ago, way back in 2018. And we determined that, the next wave of digital transformation is going to come from data. And therefore invested in people, in processes, and in technology and platforms to enable us to not just do data in pockets, but right across the organization. So we made a lot of progress in that. So I think on that one side, using structured data, it's become easier to attribute value from it. On generative AI, though, I think the jury's still out. There's a lot of hype about it, and some of it is real for sure, and we're seeing some significant value coming out of it. But if you were to listen to some of the bigger consulting companies and the numbers they're throwing around, I think there's a long way before we believe that those numbers will be true, if at all.
So can I ask you this? A lot of the organizations that I talk to are really tentative about even employing traditional AI, right? And now you're already talking about, we've done that. We've been doing it since 2018 and maybe even before that. And now you're thinking like, how do we employ this generative AI, which is a different animal per se, right? Because the inputs are one thing, but the outputs can be really creative or really different. I use it almost every day in the stuff that I do, right? So I'm kind of familiar with the way it works, whether it's image generation, text generation, or just like an amalgamation of search and things like that. What is it about DBS that makes it so forward-looking, right? That allows at least these tests to take place? I mean, you said you used a number. I wrote it down. I think $700 and something million of incremental value. That's a lot, and doubled from the previous year and doubled that from the previous year. Where does this attitude come from that it's okay to experiment?
Well, so that goes back to our overall digital transformation. And so we are probably now, if you like, on the third wave of our digital transformation. Okay. The first was really getting our tech stack and, the end-to-end processing done, which was a journey we embarked on in 2012. And I've been through 2020, through to 2016, 2017. Structured data was 2018 onwards. And now 2023, 2024 is the third wave, which is around the generative AI. We are very, very clear. I mean, we won several awards across, many, many years, being the most, transformative bank and being the best bank in the world and all that kind of stuff. And this really, we've got three core components of how we approach any form of transformation. First is, as I mentioned earlier on, being digital to the core. I mean, a lot of people apply digital lipstick. These are the people that you mentioned who are tentative in terms of using it, because they haven't really digitized to the core. And therefore, they don't have the kind of instrumentation to be able to pull out all the data or even generate the data. Forget about pulling it out. To generate the data, to then do analytics on it. So that's the first part, right? The second part is we are completely customer obsessed, right? And in this, we mean that everything that we want to do, we look at, we think that has some legs in it, starts with what does it mean for the customer, and then we work backwards, right? And so if it's not of value to the customer, we won't bother pursuing it, right? And how do we establish value to the customer? We actually go and talk to them, right? Which may sound pretty straightforward, but you'll be amazed how many people come up with products, throw them out, and realize, customers didn't want it, right? And so we talk to the customers up front. We prototype up front, right? And this gives us this experimentation culture, which leads me to the third core component of our transformation DNA, if you like, which is, having a startup culture, right? And then banks don't talk about being startup, but our startup, we've been pushing this through the organization, and we've been very clear what it means to be a startup for us. One, experimentation. We actually celebrate failure, right? And we've been doing that for years. So somebody's got a hypothesis, they go and try it out, it fails. At the end of the year, all of these get put together, and the biggest ones, they get awards, right, for driving how to fail. Of course, the ones that try and be successful are also rewarded for what they do. So we've embedded that, right? We do hackathons. We run, several experimentations with multiple partners, not necessarily within the bank, but from external. We interact with startups. We don't think of startups or fintechs as the enemy. We actually think of them as partners, and see how we could leverage and all that. So we experimentation is deeply embedded in our DNA, and has been for about a decade now.
So the large language models are the stuff that's driving a lot of this stuff in generative AI. Are you, as a team and as a group, kind of implementing your own LLMs? So you're not using the public ones. I would presume you're using very specific LLMs internally, giving them to people inside and asking them to innovate around that. No. We don't build. We haven't built our own LLM. I don't think we need to build our own LLM. There are hundreds of thousands of them out there. I mean, you go to Hugging Face and you'll find several 100,000, if not 1 million by now. So LLMs are available. It's not really the question is not really about LLMs, right? There's plenty out there, right? Some you can bring on-prem and secure them so that there's no external connection. And in some cases, you've got to use the public ones because the pace of change is massive, and you bring something in and you engineer it, keeping pace with that change. With the pace of change is not, or keeping up with that change. It's hard work. But anyway, back to the LLM thing.
So we use external LLMs mostly, but we have a wide variety of them. So at last count, I think we had about 38 different LLMs that we use, depending on the use case. There is generic uses. For example, our internal GPT or equivalent of ChatGPT, we call it DBS GPT. That one uses a public super large language model, from one of the big techs. We have use cases around compliance and legal, which are quite specific, and then we use very proprietary LLMs that have been developed by smaller companies. And so actually it's the use case that drives the selection of the LLM, as opposed to should we create our own LLM? I think the expertise required for that is very different from the typical analytics resources that a bank would have. And there are a lot of experts out there. Let them do that part of the good job. We're good at running bank processes and running bank technology. And how do we bring that and create an ecosystem that's the most efficient?
How do you, and maybe I can frame this in this way, right? A lot of big universities, whether it's in the United States, in Australia, in other places, right, do a lot of experimentation, a lot of research, and a lot of sort of, let's develop the most cutting edge tech. But then getting that tech from the research phase into the implementation phase has ended up being hard for a lot of institutions. It doesn't feel like that to me with DBS. And I'm just curious, like, how you get this experimentation mentality into implementation. And like, is there a process around trying to decide like what's going to work, what's not going to work and stuff like that? If you know what I mean? Because if you're, and the reason why I ask is because if you're enabling your teammates, right, to be able to experiment like this, whether they're winning or losing, right? You said both of them get rewarded. How do you then decide, oh, this thing needs to get implemented? And I know there's a customer side to it too. So how does all that work together?
So maybe I'll take a step back and explain my role. That might answer the question better. So what we mostly talked about until now is my chief data officer role in the bank. But I also have the chief transformation officer role in the bank. And the reason why these are together are, I'll explain. So, transformation for us is a very simple, process, right? We take big ideas, we look around corners, we assess what's coming 3 years, 5 years away. We will bring that in, understand it properly, engage with the top leadership of the company, including the CEO. And when I say engage, it does not mean, a 15-minute, 30-minute thing. I'm talking about, tens of hours spent on a specific topic, understanding what is it, what are the implications of it. And once we've determined that, yes, we understand this well enough, and yes, this has implications to us, right? We will then determine, okay, what's the roadmap? What will it look like in 2 or 3 years? And therefore, what does the organization need to be prepared for this not to be a surprise? Once that's determined, that's, if you like, the book of work. We then take this book of work and we break it down into small chunks, right? And these small chunks are understood by the masses, the population, the entire bank, as opposed to, the top 15, 20, 30 people in the bank understanding it. We break it down so that it's understandable. And once people understand what it is that needs to change, then they understand, from their existing processes, what's the delta. And at this point, we encourage to say, okay, we need to start building hypotheses. And when you've built this hypothesis, you need to go and test them, right? And that's a structured process. Now, that's experimentation at its best, right?
Yeah.
We do, and that's internally. Externally, we do the same thing. If we determine that, there's a product coming around the corner, and for example, ones that have worked around, authentication, for example, right, which moved from passwords to fingerprints to face recognition and all that kind of stuff. If we feel that concept's really going to take on, we will develop prototypes. We will go to customers and create customer focus groups and spend, hours and hours with them, explaining to them how it would work. And if it resonates, we will then go and, take it from a paper prototype to a kind of a, quick and dirty app, build it, go and test it again, right? So it's part of the process. It's not that we stand up and say, hey, here's a great idea. Can you go and experiment with it? No. It's step by step, and you naturally lead people to a point where there is nothing else to do than to try and test. And once they've done that, they're learnings, right? The ones that fail tell you that you missed something. The ones that pass say, okay, you thought about this through properly. But the ones that fail are very important because they're the ones that inform you far more than the ones that succeed, right? And that goes into your design principles.
Absolutely. I really want to know how you do this mindset thing, though, because, look, I worked at some big companies. I worked at Morgan Stanley. I worked at Goldman Sachs. We considered ourselves pretty innovative. But I never felt like failing was an option.
So
it definitely was not rewarded. I'll give you that for sure.
Yeah. Look, I'm not saying that every failure is acceptable.
No, I get that.
Yeah.
I get that.
Right?
But you understand what I mean, right? And there was no failure accepted when I was at Goldman Sachs.
Okay.
It just wasn't acceptable.
Well, a few simple components around it, really. First, I mean, you've got to prepare people. You've got to communicate it in the right way. And and there has to be a demonstration of it across the board, across the organization. The CEO must say, right, and not only say, but prove it that he's okay with it, and it has to percolate all the way down, right? Then, and so there's got to be that senior level buy-in and all that. Secondly, you've got to provide environments for people to be able to test and experiment, right? And many senior leaders say, yes, it's okay, we love experimentation, please go and experiment. But then people say, okay, I've got this idea, I don't know where to go to experiment, right?
Right.
So this is where, again, the transformation group comes in, right? So we have the tools and the platforms where people can experiment, including, we have a 1,500 square meter facility we call the Innovation Lab in the west coast of Singapore. And this is entirely dedicated for experimentation. So you've got an idea and your team needs space, you need resources, you need tooling, you need connectivity, or you need a partner to come in and all that. You got the space, go and do it. You don't have to worry about budget. You don't have to worry about all these things, right? Third is around training. So we spend quite a significant amount of time curating and delivering training around not necessarily experimentation, but how to take new ideas to fruition, right? And that one component is experimentation.
So a lot of people will listen to this and they'll think about artificial intelligence or emerging technologies and think that this is something that just like the tech teams are experimenting with, right? Like you said, there's this really large facility where the testing goes on. I don't think that that's what you're saying.
No.
But how do you then get this communication going between the people that are actually building the stuff and the people that are using it and kind of cross-pollinate those ideas? Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
So that the gal who's sitting in the front office who's dealing with clients thinks, if I could do these three things and combine them into this thing, do you know what I mean? And then, but I can't build it. Now, how does all that work?
So two things there. First, as part of our first wave of digital transformation, one of the things that we did was we reorganized product and technology and brought them together. Okay. And we call it platform, not in the broader sense of the public definition of platform, but our internal, we call it platforms. And we constructed 32 platforms. And we have this concept of two in a box, right? And so that is the business people, the product people, the sales people, and the technology people. They own the build budget, the investment budget collectively. So one person doesn't decide. It's not the business guy going, hey, I got this idea, you go and make it. Or the tech guy goes, hey, I've built this, you go and use it, right? So it's combined. So that's the first part of it, right? Secondly, since 2021, we've extended this concept of two in a box, right, across the organization, right? And so we, in the general world, it's called agile at scale, right? Yep. But we've constructed, journey thinking through the organization, where it's not just two in a box, but it's N in a box. Anybody who delivers value to a customer, right, is brought together in a horizontal construct, and they co-own every single outcome metric, right, that is relevant to that customer outcome. This drives pretty good alignment, right, and even to the point where even compensation is determined in that way, right? So it's just not hey, let's all get together and we've got a couple of KPIs that we own together. It actually is, right down to, the outcome determines the compensation, and the compensation is distributed based on this horizontal structure. So these two things is what allows us to drive scale in terms of experimentation.
It's a really interesting structural solution to what in some places could be an intractable problem, right? In other words, you don't encourage people to get together and do this. You just put them together and they end up being on the same team. We did something like this very similarly before, and it worked actually really well.
Yeah.
You don't have it create a separation of responsibilities. You create this continuity of responsibilities, and everybody's running in the same direction. Do you feel like this testing creates an internal sandbox as well? Do you know what I mean? So if you are testing things that the implication of a failure, and I put that in quotes, right, is so small that the learnings end up being way larger than whatever the potential failure is.
I would say, if not all, very nearly all cases, yes, that the learnings are far bigger than the failure. We launched this service, and it was around getting kids to open bank accounts linked to their parents. And, we were finding that there was a drop-off rate of 60, 70%. And so, people thought, okay, this is a bit of a problem. It shouldn't be 60, 70%. It should be 5%. And so there was some hypothesis. People said, okay. And the first hypothesis was, it's going across 5 different pages, and it's a 90-click process. And that's what people are bulking off at, right?
Yeah.
So hypothesis 1. And they said, okay, well, should we experiment, right? And let's do a customer discovery and then do an experiment. So, okay, they went and spoke to customers and they've got a couple of insights. And the customer was like, yeah, I'm not that bothered about it, but there's something wrong with the upload function, right? And the upload function was coming at about 70% of journey completion, right? So the guys came back and says, okay, well, it's not the number of pages. At least that's not what this set of customers said, right? What they said was, it was the upload thing that they balked at. And so, reran the process and discovered that more often than not, the connectivity between the upload function and connecting with an external partner, right, was a bit of a problem. And so, went back to the partner, we fixed the problem, and gave it dedicated bandwidth, and set it out there, and bulk rates dropped to nearly zero. Now, if we hadn't done this, right, we would have gone and recreated the entire web page, tried to reduce this from
96 steps, whatever, to 4, something like that.
To 4, spending significant tech resources in the back end, right, to get it done, and we would still have the same problem. So, there you go.
But there's a really interesting mentality thing going on here, right? Because, like I always, inside my own business, I always say, don't make me ask the next question, right? And what you're doing is you're encouraging people to follow up. You say, okay, you said 96 steps, but maybe that's not the thing that's actually doing it. Let's dig a little bit deeper here and find out why.
Yep.
Because maybe those steps are necessary, but maybe the thing is that whether it's the upload problem or some other issue that's taking place, if you can identify it, you save all this extra time on the back end. Yeah. And I do think this as well. And tell me if you think I'm wrong. All you really need is one person to create like one success like that. And then from then on, they're willing to take way more risk in their implementations and participate more in that sandbox experience where they're like, I have another idea. Can we test this one out as well? No?
Oh, absolutely. And, and when you celebrate that across the organization, right? Over 40,000 people in our organization now. When you celebrate that, many thousands see it, right? And then they know there is a sandbox. They know there is a place to go. And they know, wow, okay, I don't need to be fearful. Because, when you tell somebody you're going to fail, it's the first thing you feel is fear, right? Yeah. So, and if you provide that environment that allows for this, and actually you define success differently. You don't define success as whether did you make money or not make money. Did you learn something that you didn't know before? Completely shifts the paradigm.
So that's another really interesting question, right? Because at the beginning you mentioned this idea that like some of the stuff they've implemented has created like $780 million of incremental value. It's a lot. But what other ways do you measure these, whether it's AI-driven initiatives or any other sort of transformational initiatives, to make sure they're actually having an impact? Besides, I guess NPS, the Net Promoter Score, probably matters at some level. But how else do you measure this stuff so that people actually know like that thing that I did actually worked?
So we've got 4 key metrics. And the first one we always start with is around the customer, right? And this is not around revenue. This is around customer toil, customer satisfaction, and customer experience. And,
Yep.
Maybe on another day, we'll talk about the difference between experience and satisfaction. But, and within that comes ENPS NPS and all that. So that's the first one that we measure. The second we measure is employee, right? So any process or any value that we deliver to the customer, what does this mean to the employee from an end-to-end perspective? How much toil is there in the process, right? And how can we remove this toil? How much information search is there and how can we reduce that? How can we make sure that the workbench they're working from is equipped with all the relevant information for them to be able to make a decision straight away? And how much of this can we digitize such that there is not paper pushing and manual processes in the middle? So that's the second part. The third part we measure is around risk, right? And so whatever you do, right, you got to ensure that you don't create any risk for the customer, maybe cyber or fraud or whatever the case may be, but also for the bank. What's, if you're going to add an additional process, you've got to make sure that you don't add any additional operational risk and as a result have some failure. And then the fourth one, as we spoke about, is value. It's the dollar number, it's revenue, it's cost. That's where the 780 million comes from.
Can we dig a little bit deeper into one of the things that you said? Because this is also really interesting to me. And not a lot of business leaders talk about this. And that is this idea of like having initiatives that take this emerging tech, whether it's AI or any other tech, to make the employee experience better as well. Do you know what I mean? Because we spend a lot of time talking about being customer first, which I completely understand, right? You want your customers to be happy and satisfied and have their satisfaction and experience be great. And again, you're right. We can spend hours talking about that. But if I call a company or if I'm working at a company and I'm not satisfied in my job, or if it's too, what's the right word? If it's too hard for me to get my stuff done, it's going to filter out into what that customer experience is like as well. Do you have special initiatives that do that internally to make just everybody's job easier?
Oh, absolutely. So we have a bank-wide initiative we call Workbench Workflow, which means wherever there are handoffs, what can we do to connect, right? So we try and flow work 100% electronically, right? Now, we're not at 100% because there's always exceptions and all that kind of stuff. We will try and get some. And then on top of these flows, we put workbenches, right? And these workbenches will pipe information, right, for the person who's on the bench to make a decision, and it will pipe the information from various different workflows, right? And maybe one of the workflows could be from risk management, from the guy who's managing credit risk. One could be from operations. One could be from the branch. One could be from sales. And so to make a decision, you need different information to get to a decision point. So we try and bring that together into one. That's one. Two, we actually have a metric, right, which is employee hours saved, right? And so there was a process, for example, a trade document, and that used to take 15 hours for multiple employees to fulfill from end to end, right? And you've got 1 million of those a year, right? So that's 15 million employee hours. Now,
that's a lot.
We automate a part of it, right? Or we stitch together through Workbench Workflow a part of it, and that removes 1 million hours. And so we measure that. And it's extremely powerful, right?
Yeah.
And when we go back and we say, look, this year we saved 10 million employee hours, right? We do the same thing, by the way, for customers as well, right? In terms of customer hours saved, right? And so employee hours saved is a major metric. We also measure ENPS, so we have an internal equivalent of NPS for employees.
Employee promoter scores,
and I mean, as of last count in our horizontal structure, which is about 65% of the bank, the ENPS is 68. People love working like this.
I was going to say,
most organizations, 150 years now, have always thought about it as pillars. You've got your vertical structures and work moves from one structure to the other structure. Actually, customer value is not delivered that way. It's delivered horizontally. And when you put people together to do it that way, everybody goes, oh, no, that's going to be very difficult to work with. But once it's bedded in, 68 is more than world class.
Yeah, it's way more than world class. I like to make analogies, and I like to really simplify stuff. You can have the greatest chef in the world, making the greatest food, but if the waiter or the waitress is bad.
Yeah, there you go.
Do you know what I mean, though?
Yeah.
Like, it's the same thing. And those are definitely different pillars and different silos, right? Because the waiter and waitress is not going to go in and cook the food, and the chef is not going to serve it. And I know I'm simplifying to make a point. But again, from a customer satisfaction and from a customer experience standpoint, that's a horrible experience.
Exactly.
Even if the food's amazing. Sorry, yes. Go ahead.
Exactly. I completely agree with you. And actually, this is one of the reasons we spend a lot of time around, empathy, and formally training people to be empathetic. And it's not easy. It's very easy for you to make a statement, right? Oh, Michael, you've got to have empathy on that. I'll tell you a sob story. You've got to have empathy on that, right? And, intuitively, that, poor guy broke his leg. I'll be empathetic to him. But there are so many situations in life that are not black and white, they're gray, right? And you've got to determine the right, at what time do you display the right level of empathy? Because if you over display, it's not authentic. You under display, like your waiter analogy, you lose the customer. And so it's really important to get that balance right.
It really is. Can we talk a little bit about startups, particularly in the context of artificial intelligence? Like, I'm presuming now that I've heard all of this conversation with you, that there must be some kind of process internally to understand with whom you're working, how you engage with them, how you then integrate the products into there, and then how you decide, like, we're just not going to do this, or we're going to put it into the sandbox and take it further. Is that part of your remit as well? And I presume there's some structure around that. What does that look like?
Yes, we do. And, we have a whole accelerator program that goes from outreach to, identification. But we do it in a slightly different way from other people. Most accelerator programs are seen as, there's an outreach and says, okay, look, we're so-and-so company. Give us your information and your pitches and all that kind of stuff, and we'll determine whether we'll put you in the accelerator or not. Right. We actually do it slightly differently. We start with going to our business leaders, and we ask them for a problem statement. We then publish this problem statements, and we ask startups to say, hey, do you think you can solve this problem? And then we'll bring them in, and we'll work through that, and of course, through the sandbox and all that kind of stuff. But we determine success metrics right at the beginning. And success metrics do not necessarily mean go live with production. Some of these are you get to a point where you've learned enough that you don't need to do more, right?
Yeah.
So it's a very structured process, and we've been through hundreds and hundreds of startups over the years. More and more, we're finding that our internal culture has changed to the point where there's a lot of ideation that's happening organically, and therefore, unless something novel comes up, we're not, we don't bring them at that scale. We're more interested now, I would say, at a point where we talk more to academia as well, particularly around AI, because when OpenAI, was revealed to the world, it came as a surprise to many people. I mean, we were dabbling around with LLMs and experimenting and all that, but it was a very technical nature. We hadn't really applied business, business lens to it. So, with that, we thought, okay, maybe it's time we start talking about, not what is best practices and what people are already doing, but what are the next practices, right? What's coming in 6, 9, 12, 18 months? I think anything more than 18 months nowadays is too far out, right?
You're gambling. Yeah. You really have no idea.
Yeah. So we spend time with academia and all that. And then, there are great forums out there that we attend, and we work together with partners. We have our own lab, of course, but we work quite closely with other companies in terms of their labs.
Do you interact with academia globally?
Yes.
So are you constantly? Sorry, go ahead.
Yes, we do. In fact, quite recently, in absolutely for AI, we just did a case study that Harvard Business School will teach in their MBA. So we had a press statement on that a few weeks ago, which we can share with you after this.
Love to see it.
So we work with them. There's a few more coming over the next. Actually, there's one probably going to be released next week with another big business school. So we work with that. We work with the likes of MIT on specific topics. Same with Stanford. Of course, at home, very importantly, we work also with NTU and SMU. So yes, we do.
Yeah, really interesting stuff. So, you just mentioned this idea of like what's going to happen in the next 6 months, 8 months, 12 months, or whatever. It's hard to figure that out, right? But this stuff is rapidly evolving, particularly in the AI space, right? When you look at what the bank's looking at, because from your perch, you're seeing a ton of stuff, right? Do you have like a couple of places where you're definitely focused on going forward? Like a lot of innovation has been done already. A lot of implementation has been done already. But when you're looking from your perspective, do you look and think, we need to do more here or do more there kind of thing? My question really is around this. It's like you have this really large remit. People are constantly coming to you with ideas or coming to the team with ideas. But are there really high level places where you think we need to focus on? Because here's the thing. Your customers, whether they're business customers, SME customers, right, or even individual customers, are constantly interacting with AI, large language models on their own, right? So if they're individuals and they're writing stuff, they're using LLMs, they're using all of this technology on their own, and then they're coming to their banks or their other companies and saying, hey, how come that doesn't exist yet? I can do it that way somewhere else or at home. Are you seeing those things? Like, where do you think that focus has to be just based on customer expectations of what they think is going to happen?
Okay. This thing is evolving really quick, right? What is really exciting today in 4 months is redundant. And customers are at the forefront of this. They are experiencing all this new technology, not from banks, but from all the other places where and banks is probably one of the smallest interactions they have, right? And so they keep asking this question. So it's very important to be current and in terms of what's going on and understand, again, coming back to our process, right? In the past, looking round corners was a 3-year exercise. Now looking round corners is a 6-month exercise, right? So you got to keep looking. And the moment you spot something, you got to bring it in, right? And you figure out, what does this really mean for us, and figure it out quickly, right? Invest the time and then break it down into programs and make sure that people understand what it is and go at it. So it's an iteration. It's not a one-off exercise and say, okay, look, here are the 5 things we need to do. It's continuous. Second, and it's really, really important as this evolves. The technology is moving at a fast pace. Regulation is going to catch up. And this is going to, and so you're going to be very careful about that component as well. And AI regulation is not very mature as such, right? I mean, a lot of progress has been made.
It can't be, yeah.
A lot of progress has been made, right? Particularly, with forward-looking regulators like MAS. A lot of progress has been made, but in many components, it's still not quite there, right? Because it's evolving so quickly, right? So that's going to be taken into account as well. But I've seen use cases in AI from the health industry to manufacturing. I've seen stuff in retail which I look at and think, wow. What a wonderful idea, but that will never fly in a bank, right? Simply because, it's a regulated industry. Plus, also you're talking about people's money and savings, right? And life. So, yeah.
Can I ask you this, and then maybe I'll let you go? I don't really want to let you go, actually, but I think that we maybe have you back and just have a conversation about another kind of vertical bit of this, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
But I'm really curious, because you've worked in the entire region. I think you also said you worked in London as well, but I feel like there are some really big benefits of working in a place like Singapore and having really forward-looking regulators, particularly, and just a forward-looking government infrastructure as well, particularly as technology is rapidly changing, right? So you're not in a place where the sort of infrastructure of the city itself is getting in the way of the innovation. And I'm just curious about what you think about Singapore itself as a fintech innovation hub, both for banks, insurtech, like all that kind of stuff. Do you feel like it's a real benefit to institutions like DBS?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the pace at which, the system works is actually in sometimes even more forward than industry, right? And I'm not talking about the financial industry here. Yeah. It's a great place to be, and there's space for experimentation, space for incubation, and when you've got great ideas, there's a lot of support from the system. There have been grants around AI and all that, which we don't need the grants, but for smaller companies, this is really, really helpful. Nurturing the community the innovation community. This has been going on for years. I think, what really helps is it's not a question of I need to protect what I've got. It's more about I know what I've got. How can I grow this in the safest, possible way and most ethical way? And that drives a growth mentality as opposed to a protectionist mentality, right? And so that's what makes it amazing.
Okay, I think I'm going to leave. I think I'm going to stop there because it's a great way to kind of explain just the ethos of Singapore. It's like we're not getting in the way. We're just giving you the tools and the infrastructure to create growth and not to protect the stuff you already have. It's a great way to do this. Nimish Panchmatia, the Chief Data and Transformation Officer at DBS. This was awesome. And please, you have to come back. I'm saying it while we're still recording because I really enjoyed this.
I really enjoyed the chat, Michael. And I think, it's great because it's more a conversation rather than
But I learned a lot too.
Yes. And, I look forward to doing it again with you on another topic. If it's of interest, of course.
Oh, definitely. It's of interest to me. Thank you so much.